Act like you love me, please." The poor girl begged the CEO millionaire in front of her ex. The rain had stopped just minutes ago, leaving the streets of downtown glistening under the soft golden lights of early evening. Inside the tiny cafe tucked between two towering office buildings, Ella Monroe wiped the last table of her shift. Her apron was stained with coffee, and her once pristine ballet posture had faded into the quiet slouch of someone accustomed to long days and short dreams. At 26, Ella looked nothing like the girl who once danced across glowing stages. Her golden hair, loosely tied, framed a delicate face, still beautiful, but weary. Her sapphire blue eyes, once lit with ambition, now carried something softer, something cracked. "Ella," a coworker called, handing her a small cream-colored envelope. "Someone left this for you." She wiped her hands before opening it, her pulse quickening. Inside was a wedding invitation. "Charles Dorn and Vivian Lancaster cordially invite you to celebrate their wedding at the Wilshire Grand Hotel this Saturday at 6 p.m. Her fingers trembled. She read it again. Charles, the man she had once believed would be her forever. The man who kissed her blistered feet after rehearsals, who told her she danced like she was made of light. The man who walked out of her hospital room and out of her life when the doctor said her ankle might never heal enough to dance again. He left when her spotlight faded. No career, no applause, just a ballet slipper and a broken future. Now he was marrying Vivian, a wealthy hotel heiress. It almost made sense. Of course he would. Ella dropped the invitation onto the counter like it had scorched her skin. That night, she lay on the couch, staring blankly at the ceiling, rain tapping against the window. Marcy, her best friend and roommate, looked over from the kitchen. "You should go," Ella blinked. "Go to his wedding?" "To show him you're not the same girl he left behind." Ella laughed bitterly. "I am the same girl, just with cheaper shoes." Marcy came closer. "No. You've rebuilt yourself. You're stronger now. You've survived what he couldn't even face, and you're not going alone." Ella raised a brow. "Right. I'll just grab Ryan Gosling from the hallway." Marcy smirked. "You never know. The universe owes you something." The Wilshire Grand Hotel gleamed with opulence. Crystal chandeliers lit the lobby, and polished marble stretched beneath Ella's unsteady heels. Her soft blue dress clung modestly to her figure. Her golden hair flowed over her shoulders, a small wave framing her face. A touch of pink gloss gave her lips a fragile glow. She had come alone. But she had come. She whispered to herself, "Maybe I'll pretend to be lost. Have one drink, then vanish." Turning to leave, she collided with someone. Tall, steady, and impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit. "I'm so sorry," she started, stepping back. Her words caught in her throat. Standing before her was Damien Hawthorne. The Damien Hawthorne, CEO of Hawthorne Ventures, billionaire, brilliant, known for being cold, calculating, and completely untouchable. She had seen him before, once or twice, when delivering coffee in the skyscraper where his company rented the top floors. They had never spoken beyond a courteous nod. Still, she had remembered him. How could she not? Today, he looked exactly the same, tall, striking, his gaze sharp as cut glass. "You work at D'Amico Cafe," he said, recognizing her. His voice was smooth, calm. Ella flushed. "I do. I mean, yes, I still do. I'm just—" She gestured vaguely at the ballroom behind them. "Sorry, I shouldn't have bumped into you." He gave a polite nod, already moving to pass. But something cracked inside her. The sting of Charles's betrayal, the weight of being discarded, the shame of standing there alone. She turned abruptly. "Wait." Damien stopped. She didn't have a plan, only a plea, raw and real. Her voice broke. "Act like you love me, please." There was silence, long and loud. Damien studied her, her trembling hands, tear-rimmed eyes, the desperation that made her words fall like a whisper. And then, quietly, he nodded. His voice was firm, steady, Come with me." He extended his arm. Ella stared at it, stunned, then looked up at him, this stranger, this giant of a man, offering something he didn't owe her. There was no pity in his expression, no arrogance, only something steady, something she didn't yet understand. She placed her hand on his arm and walked with him into the lion's den. The ballroom shimmered with crystal chandeliers and soft music, the scent of roses and champagne swirling through the air. Damien walked beside Ella, posture calm, composed, as if he belonged here, which, of course, he did. Ella, however, felt every step like a stone in her stomach. She hadn't imagined the wedding would be this grand. Gold-trimmed everything, a string quartet in the corner, waiters in white gloves offering hors d'oeuvres she couldn't pronounce. It was the kind of world she had once brushed against, before the accident, before Charles left her in a hospital bed with silence and a crumpled goodbye. Now, she stood here again, with Damien Hawthorne at her side. As they entered, conversations dimmed, eyes turned, mouths whispered. Ella Monroe, with Damien Hawthorne? Isn't she the one who… The buzz of speculation built like static. Ella's heart pounded, but she kept her chin up, fingers tightening on Damien's arm. He leaned down. Ignore them. She swallowed. Easier said than done. A familiar voice cut through the music. Well, if it isn't the tragic ballerina. Ella turned. Charles Dorn. He looked just as she remembered, charming smile, styled brown hair, expensive tuxedo, and eyes that always knew how to cut. Beside him stood his new bride, Vivian Lancaster, in a couture gown that screamed money and privilege. Vivian looked Ella up and down, her expression curling into something between amusement and pity. "You're brave," Vivian said sweetly, "coming here alone." "She's not alone," Damien said coolly. Charles's gaze shifted to him. For a second there was confusion, then realization, then annoyance. "Damien Hawthorne," Charles said, extending a hand. Damien didn't take it. "Charles." Ella could feel the tension building like heat on her skin. Vivian leaned in. "We were just saying how nostalgic this all feels, like a ghost from the past walking in." Charles chuckled. "The ghost of Pas de Deux." The room grew quieter. People were watching. Ella tried to speak, but the lump in her throat rose faster than her courage. She turned slightly, but Damien didn't let her. Instead, he stepped forward. Without warning, without hesitation, he slid his arm around her waist, pulled her close, and kissed her. Gasps rippled through the room. His lips were warm, steady, not rushed, not for show. His hand held the small of her back like she might disappear. Ella's eyes widened, but she didn't pull away. When he finally broke the kiss, the silence was deafening. All eyes were on them. Damien looked at Charles, then Vivian, voice calm but razor-sharp. "Do not speak to my fiancé that way." A murmur ran through the crowd. "Fiancé?" Charles's expression froze. Vivian blinked. "Fiancé?" Charles echoed. Damien didn't flinch. "That's right. Ella and I are engaged." Ella stared at him, stunned. Engaged? He was really doing this. She could barely breathe. "Congratulations," Vivian said stiffly. Quite the surprise. Damien turned to Ella, and for a moment their eyes met, and she saw something there. Not calculation, not performance. Something else. Ella blinked back tears, not from humiliation, but from how fiercely he had stood beside her, how, in a moment where she could have crumbled, he had held her up. Charles looked like he wanted to say more, but a waiter interrupted to lead the newlyweds to the main stage for their first dance. People returned to their conversations, though eyes still lingered. Ella pulled Damien aside, voice barely a whisper. "Why did you say that?" He looked down. "Because it shut them up." She shook her head. "That kiss. I figured if I was going to act," he said, "I might as well be convincing." Her cheeks flushed, but she didn't press further. The truth was, she didn't hate it. She had expected to feel embarrassed, small, forgotten. But standing next to Damien, she felt safe, and seen. Maybe it was all a charade. Maybe it was a moment of impulse. But as the music swelled and the newlyweds danced, Ella found herself wondering if pretending, just for tonight, might be the only real thing she had felt in a long, long time. The night had fallen gently over the city, casting silver reflections on the tinted windows of Damien's car. Inside it was quiet. Ella, exhausted from the emotionally charged evening, had fallen asleep in the passenger seat. Her golden hair framed her face, her hands resting lightly in her lap. Even in slumber, there was a shadow of sadness behind her peaceful expression. Damien glanced at her, his hand tightening slightly on the steering wheel. He didn't wake her. He couldn't. Instead, he let the silence wrap around him and allowed his mind to wander backward, far beyond the reach of boardrooms, wealth, or tailored suits. Back to when he was just Damien, not Mr. Hawthorne. He had been 13, skinny, angry, alone. The orphanage was cold in the winter and stifling in the summer. Meals were forgettable. The walls were always peeling. The older boys fought for dominance while the younger ones cried quietly in corners. Damien did neither. He just kept his head down, survived. Until she arrived. She was older, maybe 17 or 18. Blonde hair in a messy bun, long legs, a dancer's posture. She came in wearing a faded jacket and ballet flats. She smiled too brightly for a place so dull. He remembered how all the kids had stared. No one ever came just to spend time with them, especially not someone like her. She introduced herself simply, Ella. She taught them how to stretch, how to point their toes, how to pretend they were floating even when they felt heavy. The other kids laughed, struggled, fell, but Damien watched her with quiet awe. She was light, the opposite of everything in his world. She came once a week for 2 months. It was the only time the common room didn't feel like a cage. On her last day, she pulled Damien aside. "I brought something for you," she said, smiling. From her bag, she pulled out a worn ballet slipper, soft pink, frayed at the seams, the satin faded with use. He stared at it. "I don't need it anymore," she said. "But maybe you do." He looked confused. She knelt so her eyes met his. "Listen, okay? If one day you make it, if you ever get out of here and find your place in the world, help someone, the way I'm trying to help you." Her voice had trembled a little. "Promise me that." He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Then she hugged him, brief, warm, and gone too quickly. She never came back. But Damien never forgot. Back in the present, Damien parked the car outside his penthouse. Ella still slept, her breathing soft. He reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a small box, worn leather, aged corners. He opened it slowly. Inside, wrapped in tissue, was the ballet slipper. Time had not been kind to it. The satin was dull. The sole was separating. But he had kept it, moved it from place to place, office to home, success to success, because it reminded him that someone once believed he was worth saving. And now, all these years later, that girl sat beside him again, asleep, fragile, and unaware. Unaware that the man she begged to pretend had once held onto her gift like a lifeline. Damien turned toward her and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered for a moment, hesitant. "Still giving light where it's darkest," he murmured. She stirred slightly but didn't wake. He looked back down at the slipper in his hand. "You saved me first, Ella." And now, it was his turn. In the days after the wedding, Ella found herself swept into a life that felt borrowed, a world of charity galas, rooftop dinners, and art exhibits, always with Damien at her side. To everyone else, they were a perfect couple, the mysterious CEO and his graceful fiancé. To her, it was still an arrangement. At least, that's what she kept telling herself. They had never spoken of terms or timelines. It had begun with a single sentence, "Come with me." And somehow, it hadn't ended. Damien never questioned it. He simply showed up, car ready, introductions smooth, presence constant. He played the part flawlessly. But what unsettled Ella were the moments when it didn't feel like acting at all. At a garden brunch one morning, a waiter approached. "Would you like some tea, ma'am?" Before she could answer, Damien replied without looking up. "Chamomile. Light honey. No lemon." Ella blinked. He finally met her gaze. "That's what you drink after a long day, isn't it?" She nodded slowly. "Yes, it is." He returned to his phone as though nothing had happened, leaving her quietly stunned. Another night, at a rooftop auction, the wind turned sharp. She rubbed her arms, and before she even spoke, Damien was already slipping off his jacket, placing it gently around her shoulders. She looked up. "You didn't have to." He was already walking ahead. "Come on, you'll catch a cold." He never touched her unnecessarily, yet when they walked through crowds, his hand would rest lightly at the small of her back, guiding, steadying, protective. Each gesture was brief, polite, but too natural, too knowing. She began to notice him more, the way he loosened his tie exactly 2 buttons after every event, how his jaw tensed when someone whispered cruelly about her past, how he never let go of her hand first. And slowly, dangerously, she began to wonder, was any of this real? But then she would remember Charles, his charm, his promises, and how easily he had left her behind. She had believed in love once. It had nearly broken her. She would not make that mistake again. One rainy evening, after a long appointment, Ella returned to Damien's penthouse. The city outside blurred behind streaks of rain. Her head was spinning. Her body trembled with exhaustion. She barely reached the couch before collapsing. Damien appeared within seconds. "What happened?" he asked, kneeling beside her. "I don't know," she murmured weakly. "Just dizzy." He touched her forehead, hot. "You have a fever." "I'll be fine," she insisted, trying to sit up. "I just need—" But he was already moving, phone in hand, then stopped, looked at her again, and set it down. Instead of calling his assistant, he rolled up his sleeves and walked into the kitchen. 20 minutes later, he returned with a bowl of rice porridge, the steam curling in the air. "Eat," he said simply. She blinked. "You made this?" He nodded. "I watched a video." Her lips curved faintly. "In your $6,000 suit?" He gave a small shrug. "I changed the tie." He helped her sit up, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, and fed her small spoonfuls when her hands trembled too much to hold the bowl. The warmth spread slowly through her, and though she was too tired to speak, her chest ached at the sight of him. This man, who didn't have to care, but did. He stayed beside her through the night, dampening her forehead with a cool cloth, checking her temperature every hour. When dawn crept through the curtains, Ella stirred and opened her eyes. Damien was asleep on the couch beside her, still in his shirt and slacks, his head tilted back, exhaustion etched across his face. She watched him quietly. No one had ever stayed before. Not through pain, not through fever, not through fear. Not even when she had been at her most broken. Maybe it had begun as pretend. But this night, this care, was something real. Something that felt dangerously close to love. Ella stepped quietly into Damien's study, still holding the cup of tea he had made for her. The apartment was quiet that evening, the soft hum of the city below filtering through the large windows. She had never spent much time in this room before. It wasn't cold or sterile like she imagined a billionaire's office would be. It was warm, lived in. Books lined the shelves, a record player sat in the corner, and on the wall, just above the desk, hung a small frame. It caught her attention immediately. She moved closer, her brows furrowing. It was an old photograph, slightly faded. A girl in a simple leotard stood in the middle of a group of children, arms gracefully extended, mid-spin. Her golden hair was tied back in a loose bun, her face full of light and focus. The children around her clapped and laughed. The setting was familiar. A worn-out gymnasium, cracked tiles, a makeshift bar on the wall. Ella felt a strange tightness in her chest. She leaned in. It was her. Younger, brighter, full of dreams. It had been taken during one of those volunteer days when she visited the orphanage to teach ballet. She hadn't even known someone was taking photos then. She hadn't seen this picture in years. Maybe ever. But Damien had it. She turned around, holding the frame delicately in her hands, and found Damien standing in the doorway, watching her. This is me," she said softly. He nodded. "How do you have this?" Damien stepped into the room, his expression unreadable. "Someone took it. I found it years ago and kept it." She blinked. "But why?" His eyes lingered on the photograph, then shifted back to her. "Because the girl in that photo," he said quietly, "saved me." Ella's breath caught. She opened her mouth to ask what he meant, but something in his tone silenced her. It wasn't the time. Not yet. She returned the frame to its spot and stepped back. The room felt different now, as if some invisible door had opened between them, one neither of them had dared approach until now. Later that night, as she was getting ready to leave for the evening, Damien appeared at the hallway with a small box in his hands. It was wrapped simply, no ribbon, no card. He held it out to her. "What's this?" she asked. "Open it," he said. Inside, nestled in white tissue paper, was a pair of ballet slippers, not store-bought, mass-produced ones. These were handcrafted, elegant, made for performance. Her size, perfect. Her hand trembled as she lifted one. She looked up at him, eyes wide. "Damien." His voice was gentle. "You used to fly, Ella." She stared at him, heart pounding. "You'll fly again." The tears came before she could stop them. Silent at first, then unstoppable. He stepped forward without hesitation and wrapped his arms around her. She buried her face in his chest, the slippers still clutched in one hand, and cried like she hadn't cried in years. For the girl she used to be, for the boy he once was, for the strange, beautiful path that had brought them back to each other. He held her tighter. No words, no pretending, only truth. The rain came down hard that night, blurring the windshield with streaks of silver. Damien's car glided through the wet streets, its headlights casting long shadows on the slick pavement. Ella sat beside him in silence, still glowing faintly from the evening's gala, her blue dress catching bits of city light as they passed beneath street lamps. The night had been perfect, almost suspiciously so. For the first time in years she had laughed freely. Her hand had rested in Damien's without pretense. The kisses they shared weren't for show. She had started to believe in something again, in him. But perfection, she would later think, is always the calm before the storm. The first flash came from the side, too bright, too sudden. Paparazzi. Another burst of white light, then another. Damien's jaw clenched. "Hold on." A black SUV swerved behind them, far too close. They weren't just photographing anymore. They were chasing. "Why are they following us like this?" Ella asked, her voice tight with fear. "They want a story," Damien muttered, accelerating slightly. "They'll do anything for it." Another flash, closer. The SUV swerved again, cutting into the lane. Then came the screeching of tires. The impact slammed into them from the side, metal against metal, the sickening crunch of force meeting resistance. Ella's scream was lost in the sound of breaking glass as the world flipped sideways. The car spun once, twice, before lurching to a stop at the curb. Silence. Then, "Ella." Damien's voice was raw, panicked, nothing like the composed man the world knew. She wasn't responding. Her head lay slumped against the window, blood trickling from her temple. Damien was out of his seatbelt before the airbags fully deflated. He yanked open her door, hands shaking, voice cracking as he called her name again and again. "Stay with me," he whispered, gathering her in his arms. "Please, stay with me." The ambulance arrived minutes later, though to Damien, it felt like hours. The hospital room was quiet except for the beeping of the monitors. Damien sat beside her bed, still in his torn shirt, his knuckles bloodied, though he didn't remember when he had hit something. Ella lay motionless, her face pale against the white pillow. The doctor had said it was a mild concussion, trauma to the head, likely temporary memory loss. No brain damage, no fractures. She may forget recent events, the doctor had explained, especially emotionally charged ones. Damien hadn't said a word. He had only nodded once, his jaw clenched, his chest aching with something far deeper than panic. Now, he sat beside her, watching her breathe. She stirred. He leaned forward. "Ella?" Her eyes opened slowly. She blinked, confused, then winced at the light. "Hey," Damien said gently, trying to keep his voice calm. "You're safe. You're in the hospital. There was an accident, but you're going to be okay." She looked at him for a long moment, and then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she asked, "Who are you?" The words hit him like a punch to the chest. He couldn't speak. She looked down at her hands, then back at him. Why are you here? Did you find me?" Damien stood slowly, forcing himself to breathe. He paused, then swallowed. "Yes, I was with you, when it happened." Ella looked away, troubled. "I don't remember anything. Not this, not you." He wanted to reach for her hand, to say her name the way he had learned to, softly, like a promise. But he didn't. Instead, he nodded. Once. "I understand." She closed her eyes again, her face twisting faintly, as if trying to summon something that refused to return. He watched her for a long time. Then he turned and walked to the window, his hands buried in his pockets, shoulders heavy. She had forgotten the laughter, the tea, the quiet glances, the kiss, forgotten him. But Damien knew one thing for certain. He would not walk away. Not now. Not again. The rain had returned that evening, soft and rhythmic against the hospital window panes. Ella lay in bed, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. Her body felt stronger by the day, but her mind remained hazy, fogged over, as if someone had pulled a curtain over the last month of her life. The doctors told her not to force it. Memories would return when they were ready. But she hated the emptiness, hated the strange ache in her chest she couldn't name, the way her heart fluttered whenever Damien entered the room and then fell again when she couldn't remember why. He had been kind, always calm, always nearby. Yet, somehow, there was a sadness in his eyes every time he looked at her, like he was waiting for something, or mourning something already lost. That night, after the nurses dimmed the lights and left her alone, she noticed something unusual on the small table beside her bed. A ballet slipper. Not new. Old. Worn. The satin frayed. The toe box crushed from years of use. She picked it up gently, running her fingers along its edges. Her breath caught. It looked familiar. She closed her eyes. The slipper clutched to her chest. Sleep came quickly. And with it, a dream. She was dancing. The floor was dusty, the room small, lit by shafts of afternoon Sunday. Children sat in a circle, clapping as she twirled. She wore a simple leotard, her golden hair pulled back. Her feet were blistered, but her heart was light. A boy stood in the corner, watching her with wide, silent eyes. Thin, quiet, alone. She danced toward him, held out her hand, and smiled. He didn't take it, just stared like she was something out of a dream. The image shifted. She was kneeling, placing the ballet slipper into the boy's small hands. And then she heard her own voice. "If you ever make it out of here, promise me you'll help someone, the way I'm helping you." The dream dissolved into darkness. Ella sat up in bed, breath ragged, tears on her cheeks. It wasn't a dream. It was real. She threw off the blanket, gripped the ballet slipper tightly, and rushed out of the room, ignoring the nurse calling after her. Rain soaked through her sweater as she stumbled down the hospital steps and into the waiting car she remembered only vaguely. The driver tried to stop her, but she insisted, eyes blazing. "Take me to Damien Hawthorne. Please." Damien stood in the rain, staring out from the balcony of his penthouse. He hadn't been able to sleep. His chest had been heavy all night, haunted by the silence in her voice, the emptiness in her gaze. He hadn't told her. hadn't forced her to remember. Because love, real love, never demands. It waits. Behind him, the elevator chimed. He turned. Ella stood there, soaked to the bone, her hair clinging to her face, the ballet slipper gripped in one trembling hand. Her lips parted, but no words came at first. Then, in a voice thick with wonder and something close to disbelief, she asked, "The boy from the orphanage, that was you, wasn't it?" Damien didn't move, didn't speak, but the look in his eyes, soft, broken, open, was the only answer she needed. Ella stepped forward, her tears mixing with the rain. Her voice cracked. "He remembered me all this time." He nodded once. "I never forgot," he said. "Not for a second." She let out a shaky laugh, the ballet slipper still pressed against her chest. And for the first time since the accident, everything came back. The old theater stood beneath a soft gray sky, quiet but full of new life. Once forgotten, its walls were now being restored, fresh paint, new beams, the echoes of laughter returning to its halls. Though not yet officially open, it already felt alive again. Across the street, Ella stood motionless, clutching a worn ballet slipper to her chest. Not just a keepsake, a symbol of what was broken and what had healed. She stepped inside. The scent of sawdust and fresh varnish met her as she moved down the hall. Workers nodded at her with quiet recognition. At the end stood a large studio, light pouring in from tall windows. She entered and stopped. A mural covered the far wall. A young girl in a simple leotard danced mid-spin, golden hair in motion, surrounded by laughing children. The image was a mirror of the past. Her past, that day at the orphanage, frozen, in color. Ella pressed a hand to her mouth, her eyes filled with tears. "You remembered," she whispered. Behind her, footsteps. She turned. Damien stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, his expression uncertain. "I didn't know if you'd come," he said. She walked toward him slowly, then suddenly ran and wrapped her arms around him from behind, resting her cheek against his back. "This time," she whispered, her voice trembling, "I'm not here for pretend. I'm here because I love you." He turned to face her, stunned. The mask he wore so often slipped away. His eyes shimmered with emotion. "I was saving this," he said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small velvet box. Inside, a simple, timeless ring. He took her hand and slid it onto her finger. "You kept your promise that day," he said softly. "Now it's my turn." She nodded, smiling through tears. A few weeks later, sunlight spilled into that same studio, now transformed into a wedding venue. No photographers, no press, just love. Their guests were children from shelters, volunteers, and old friends who had stood beside them in silence and support. Ella wore a white dress that flowed like a whispered melody. Her golden hair fell loose around her shoulders. On her feet, new ballet slippers. Damien stood waiting at the front in a gray suit, his breath catching when he saw her. She walked toward him slowly, each step lighter than the last. When they met, he took her hands, his voice unsteady. "From a boy no one saw, you gave me a reason to live. Today, I vow to love you as deeply as you once loved a boy with nothing." Tears rolled down her cheeks, and his. The applause that followed was not loud, but real. Not from the powerful, but from the ones who understood love best. A year passed. The center now thrived, music, dance, joy filling its walls. Ella taught ballet each week, helping young girls find strength through grace. Damien still led board meetings and closed billion-dollar deals, but he always came home to the studio. To her. They built more than a school. They built a sanctuary. One afternoon, someone snapped a photo. Ella sat beside Damien, her head resting gently on his shoulder. In her lap was the old ballet slipper, worn, frayed, and full of meaning. The photo now hangs in the front hallway. And beneath it, engraved in gold, "Act like you love me? No, you always did. Thank you for watching this emotional journey of love, memory, and redemption. If this story touched your heart, if it made you believe, even for a moment, that love can heal, and kindness can change a life, then we invite you to stay with us. There are many more stories waiting to be told, stories that stir your soul, make you cry, and remind you what it means to be human. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that hype button to support Soul-Stirring Stories, the channel that brings you heartfelt tales every week. Your support means the world to us. Until next time, stay kind, stay strong, and never stop believing in love.